Thomas Lamb. His bush-flying career, which led to the founding of Lamb Airways in 1935, contributed significantly to the exploration and development of northern Manitoba and the eastern Arctic. His exceptional leadership and problem-solving skills in the face of adversity, coupled with his many mercy missions to aid the First Nations people of these regions, have been of major benefit to Canadian aviation and Canadians in general. Tom Lamb was born on June 29, 1898, at Grand Rapids, Manitoba, the second of 11 children. When he was 2 years old, the family moved to remote Moose Lake, where his father established a fur trading business. They built a log cabin and store near an Indian reserve to attract Cree trappers for trading furs. Young Tom Lamb grew up with Cree children as companions and learned to speak their language fluently. Although Tom received little formal education, he learned from the Cree elders about survival techniques, building birch bark canoes, boiling spruce gum into pitch, making fishing nets and spears. He would call upon these skills years later to survive in the north. Before he was 10, he was accompanying his father on his fish haul operations with horse-drawn sleighs, learning about surviving in extremely cold temperatures. Some trips lasted more than a week. His father sent him on trading missions by dog sled with strict instructions on how to trade. By the age of 11, his father trained him as a teamster on his fish hauls and sent him out as team leader. These long hauls were hell on earth, as he described them, with blizzards, grueling portages, broken sleighs, and the constant risk of crashing through thinning ice. Luckily, the Indians who worked for his father looked out for the young teamster. Young Tom was handling his father's boats by age 17. He took on jobs as a boat builder, carpenter, sawmill operator, and as engineer on other freighting boats. Having mastered many skills and overcome endless obstacles, he was ready to set out on his own. He married Jean Armstrong in 1924. They built their home at Moose Lake, and they raised 3 daughters and 6 sons, each of whom later participated in the various companies he established. He bought out his father's trading post and fur business in 1926. He set up a sawmill and planer and built houses and a school for the Indians on the Moose Lake Reserve. By the late 1920s, Lamb became alarmed at the population decline of beaver and muskrat, the main fur animals in the area, due to low water levels and over-trapping. He conceived a muskrat restoration plan, and in 1931 he leased 54,000 acres of swampy land near Moose Lake. After 5 years of intensive effort and responding to bureaucratic red tape, nearly 5,000 muskrat houses were counted. Thus Lamb pioneered methods of conservation and development for the North's fur industry. He expanded his commercial fishing operations. For many years, he hauled thousands of tons of frozen whitefish from remote lakes to the Paw and Cormorant Lake railroad siding with up to 12 teams of horses. He introduced Caterpillar tractors in 1930, but the northern winters still imposed costly delays. In 1931, during one of these fish hauls, his tractor got stuck in the slush about 20 miles from the railway siding. A bush pilot, seeing the trouble Lamb was in, landed. Lamb hired him to fly his fish to Cormorant siding, the first time that fresh fish was hauled by airplane in northern Manitoba. Soon after, Lamb bought a Stinson Reliant CFAUS in Winnipeg and hired a pilot and engineer. Lamb Airways was formally incorporated in 1935. The following year, he built barges and a tugboat, the Skippy L, for summer freighting, and established Lamb Transport, a much-needed service in the area. As word got out that Lamb had an airplane for hire at the Paw, his pilot was kept very busy hauling fresh fish and doing general charter work, flying missions for both government and private customers, the RCMP, and medevacs that saved many lives. Lamb decided to fly his own plane. He got his commercial license in 1937 and became an adept pilot, at home on skis or floats. He could get his plane in and out of the most difficult spaces in the worst weather, and he could find the tiniest Inuit village in the trackless barrens. Tom Lamb expanded his fleet of aircraft and bought his first Norseman in 1946, equipped with floats and skis. The Norseman allowed Lamb to conduct flights further into the Arctic. Winter was a challenge, navigating across the whiteness of the barren lands, looking for the small dark spot of a camp or a village. In the 1950s, Lamb was chartered by the federal government to take doctors along with food and supplies to Inuit villages along the Kazan and Thelon rivers. These Inuit were starving and badly needed medical attention. By the early 1950s, several of his sons had their pilot licenses and were also trained as airplane mechanics. Tom Lamb passed on to them his hard-won experience in the airmanship they needed to fly in arduous weather and terrain. By the mid-1950s, all 6 sons, Greg, Donald, Dennis, Jack, Doug, and Conrad, were flying for Lamb Airways. One amazed client recalled, "Every one of those boys can do everything that's needed to be done up here in the north. They fly planes like they were born with wings. They repair plane engines and tractors, run freight boats and sawmills, and build roads and sleighs and boats." Tom Lamb brought up his boys to tackle any job, no matter how tough it is. This even meant surviving crashes. They would rescue each other, often repairing planes and helicopters on the spot. Here a ski breaks off on a hard landing, and the pilot takes off and lands on one ski. Since 1935, the company's motto was, "Do not ask where we fly, tell us where you want to go." Often one could witness Tom Lamb and his sons taking off one after another on varied missions. Scheduled and chartered operations were conducted in northern Manitoba, throughout the Central Arctic, and to Baffin Island, Sable Island, Greenland, the Yukon, and Alaska. His son Greg used the Norseman in 1952 in support of the large-scale Canadian Geological Survey in the Northwest Territories. Lamb's airline operation was involved in every major construction project in northern Manitoba and the Central Arctic in the late 1940s to the mid-1950s. These developments included the International Nickel Mine in Thompson, building the railway and highways to this community, and construction of Manitoba hydro stations and power lines. All of these jobs demanded and received reliable air service. In 1953, Lamb, with his enthusiasm for conquering new frontiers, proved yet another point, that cattle ranching could be carried out successfully above the 53rd parallel. He raised more than 500 head of purebred Hereford cattle on his 5,000-acre 7-Bar L ranch on the shores of Moose Lake. He would haul the trailers by Caterpillar tractor to the rail lines. Unfortunately, this ranch was submerged a few years later when the Grand Rapids Hydro Dam was built. But Lamb and his sons kept building their air service, changing the company name to Lamb Air in 1965. On May 22, 1969, Tom Lamb was presented with an honorary Doctor of Laws degree from the University of Manitoba in recognition of distinguished public service. He had earned this distinction as a far-sighted businessman and pioneering frontiersman. Tom Lamb died at the age of 71 on December 31, 1969. His sons carried on with Lamb Air until 1981, when it ceased operations. And after 97 years of continuous service by the Lamb family, particularly the daughters, the Lamb store was sold in 1997. Tom Lamb's family has accepted several honors and awards on his behalf, such as the Leo Mall Bronze Sculpture and the Nunavut Government Award in 2007. The Maudsley Wildlife Area was renamed the Tom Lamb Wildlife Management Area. The Paw Airport was unofficially declared Tom Lamb Field. In 2008, the Winnipeg Free Press asked its readers to make a list of their top 50 nominees of the greatest Manitoban. Tom Lamb made third place on the list. Thomas Lamb was inducted as a member of Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame at ceremonies held in Wetaskiwin, Alberta on May 30th, 2009.